Okay, now.
All right, ready?
Ready?
All right, well, we'll start our budget discussion. Jim, you want to start us off? Have any thoughts?
Well, sure. You've had budget presentations from all the departments. Again, as we talked about at the outset, budget is balanced. It has about $15,000 to the good, which is pretty small, the smallest number actually that we've had over the last 8 years. We do have this year, just with health insurance, with renewals coming in with a 0% increase. This year, we know that we have a little bit of flexibility in the general fund, about $110,000. The way our contracts are written, the following year, though, there is, the way the provisions are done, we have the potential to see a $200,000 increase there, just with a 10% rate increase. There's a cap that goes forward that our employees are able to catch or keep. That is a conversation that is beyond having a discussion here on how that cap works, but we do have the way the cap works, there is the amount that the city is willing to cover for health insurance costs increase 5% each year. There's a maximum increase. If the increase is above that, then we have to do a renegotiation process on what's included in the health coverage to keep our costs within that 5% amount. That being said, if we're down below it this year, instead of having a 5% increase the following year, we're looking at a 10%. So we have to be able to still cover that. So you do have a one-time set of money that you could have some consideration of doing something beyond what's been presented with a balanced budget and maintaining our existing level of service. The items that have come up for consideration have all been personnel. We had a discussion about filling in the transit manager position that's been sitting vacant for 6-7 years now, since we went through a budget reductions several years ago. That was at a cost $90,000 to do half-time there and half-time in the other half of that position that was cut from engineering. That's what we were looking at. The other proposals that we'd had that had come up for changes in potential staffing were all within the police department. Whether that was someone in criminal investigations, adding an additional staff person there with potential cost. The first year with training, $110,000, but annual salary and benefits at the $90,000 range on an ongoing basis. The other main position that was discussed there was looking at the evidence tech position, which is currently a part-time position, and moving that to a full-time position. With the additional pay and benefits that would go with that, you'd be looking at a new ongoing cost of about $50,000. I don't know if one of those are things that you were looking to do, or if you're wanting to stand pat with where the budget is, or what other alterations you would want to take a look at. The other piece I put on there is we are maintaining our existing property tax levy. We're trying to have a budget that stays within the existing levy and not see an increase if at all possible. With one of the presentations that has been made recently, though it wasn't part of the budget, that does have a potential impact, is what are you doing with auditorium long term? You had a proposal come in from another group to look at ongoing new arrangements there. They would likely not impact this upcoming budget year, but it does call into question the request from BRE for an extension of their contract. BRE has presented a couple of options for you to look at. They'd be willing to do a shorter term 2-year amendment to our existing contract. The main change there the terms, the 250,000 annually and the same 80-20 split on revenues with us keeping the legacy events revenues is, that's all the same as what's in the current contract. It would change though for them, they would recognize that they would take over the liquor license from Burlington Steamboat Days, so the language that talks about management of that contract would no longer be necessary within the agreement. BRE has also talked about a second potential proposal for you to consider, and that would be a longer-term agreement, more in the 6-year range. It changes the amount of the subsidy from $250,000 annually reduces it to $200,000. I think that was for the first 3 years, and then reduces it for the final 3 years down to $175,000. With that, it also changes the dynamics of the rentals. They would take over also all of the legacy events. Some of that would, for our staff's purposes, it would be a little bit of easy use for that, not to have that be something that we were managing, because it gets kind of tough when we're working and setting rates that then fall under them to manage, and then we have other special rates that we're having to negotiate. That would put all that onto them, but it would also put a larger percentage of the rental amounts to BRE on an ongoing basis. So that's a dynamic that you can also try to figure out how you want to look at. Is that something that you want to have a consideration of a longer term arrangement that would free up some potential operating capital that you could have as part of your discussion for what you're looking with alternative positions? And with that, I turn it over to you for what thoughts there are for what the council would like to do.
Well, which one do you guys want to tackle first? Is there on the staffing requests, is there any thoughts on any of those positions Jim discussed, and how do we pay for them?
I see the need for both positions, so I really feel torn. We did spend time down at the police department seeing step by step everything that the evidence technician did, all the lapses that could happen in the time-sensitive nature of that position. So I feel very passionate that's a very important position. On the other hand, I asked Nick for some additional information, and there are a lot of balls being dropped there simply because he's short manpower. So staff training's not getting done on occasion. Grievances aren't getting handled in a timely fashion. So I just didn't know if maybe we could be equitable. Would either of those positions work well with a part-time position? I don't know, would a part-time position help you out, Nick? Would a part-time position help you, additional hours in the evidence tech position? So that was a question that I had.
I too have the same question on whether or not a part-time transit manager makes any sense. I don't know if Nick wants to answer that, but I'd take the evidence tech one step further. The balance sheet the other day, when Steph went over the accounting numbers, I think there's 84. There's enough out there that we need to focus on the evidence that's sitting in with the Burlington Police Department that needs to be processed. I'd like to see us move that position from part-time to full-time with this year's budget. Again, Nick, I don't know, does it make sense to consider a part-time transit manager?
Well, you can go ahead, Nick, but I did inquire. Regional planning has a gentleman that works 80%, and it's going to be expensive.
I think the toughest part with a part-time person is finding somebody that's qualified, that's looking for part-time work to do that type of function. I don't know. I mean, in theory, that's what you're getting if you do a part-time transit manager with a part-time engineering type function. The biggest thing is the benefits that don't come with it if you do part-time.
One of the things that we had had a discussion about several years ago when we were doing budget reductions. One of the things that was contemplated was having some level of combination of transit management between Southeast Iowa Regional Planning and ourselves. That would be an option that you could look at where you had made that a full-time position that did both. I don't know how practical it would be. The other part of it that I would put a warning on is from a staffing perspective, I think that there would be potential for some difficulties with our staffing just in terms of not being happy with that kind of arrangement. It's difficult. They see the risk of what happens to them long-term too, whether largely because of the discussion that was held with the proposal to have it outsourced to Southeast Iowa.
At that time, it was a contracting of the services rather than a contracting of the divisional manager for that, but.
But any discussions that come up that get into that creates a lot of distrust.
Correct.
So.
Well, thanks, Nick. Where I'm at, I'm just going to tell you where I'm with having the 6 officers coming online this spring. I'm okay with staying with status quo there. The transit director, I'm not saying that that's not important. I'd like to address it at some point in time, but I think we need to look at more options there, given on some of the things that I found out when I started looking at it. The evidence tech, I could see where that is a need. My thing would be, Chief, I don't want to accomplish the same with more hours. So if that was the goal of putting that person full-time, we need to get that backlog taken care of. And that would be where I'd be at on that. So the onus would fall on you to get that done. And that's really, for what we're looking at now with the balanced budget, that's the easiest thing to do if we use the part of the insurance money this year. And then we'll have to figure it out the next year.
Yeah, and I want to address your question, Linda, just a little bit about having another part-time person in there. We talked a little bit about it down at the police department when you came for your visit, and having 2 people in that position, and it's the same, just like Nick had talked about with a transit supervisor having somebody part-time. It's very difficult to find people that stay in that position and are very interested in it. And I'm thankful for the person that we have. And like I said there, she's not the one that requested the full-time hours, but she's very efficient and a great find for us. And to find a quality person like we talked about, there has been a difficulty over the last several years and has in the past from my experience. Finding somebody that's willing to work in that environment and understand the process. And to get 2 people to do that, I'm just afraid something will be missed in the processes between the 2. So to hire 2 part-time, I don't know if the savings would outweigh the benefit that we would have just giving the 11 extra hours a week to that person, so that continuity's there. And Mayor, I agree with you. And as we talked about down there, those areas that we're talking about that I see the deficiencies was the reason that I brought this up.
Sure.
And that's the only reason I brought it up. Not to give somebody extra hours, but to make sure that gets done and to focus on that and put our efforts towards that. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly. That's where it would go.
Yeah, I very impressed by the person in that position. So I don't have any problems thinking that would get resolved, so.
Could you remind me, Chief, how many hours your current tech works?
29 hours. Well,
20
we just moved her from 28 to 29 hours a week.
So it'd be an extra 11 hours a week?
Yes.
And you think that she could get the backlog taken care of?
Whittle away.
I think and I wouldn't say this, but just for the type of employee that she's shown me over the last 4 or 5 months and how quickly she's gotten to the point where she's at. Because like I said, I've seen this over the course of my history with the police department, and that's not an easy job to do. I've done it myself back in the early 90s, and it can become very overwhelming, that property in and property out. She handles it very well and catches on very quick. Very rarely do do myself or the commander of CID or the detectives that go down there have to remind her that this needs to be done or that needs to be done. She definitely is a person that's well organized and takes instruction well and can accomplish those instructions with ease and get it right the first time. So.
Okay.
Chief, just a quick question, and I'm not quite sure it's been answered yet or asked, but the personnel that you have, they have interest in staying on in a full-time capacity, correct?
In the evidence room?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right. That was something, because I agree with you. I was extremely impressed by her the other day. And I think that, as much as having the position full-time, it's also important for whoever you put in the position. So, again, that's one of the reasons why I'd be in favor of adjusting the budget to reflect a full-time evidence tech position versus 2 part-time. I also think if you go to 2 personnel, now you have to pay for training for 2 people. Will that increase those costs? And I think it just wouldn't be as beneficial.
And I think, well, to add somebody else part-time, I don't know if I would, if I was to add somebody, would I do it at 15 hours or how many hours would I
Right.
give them as another part-time employee? I would have one at 29 and another one at 11, which it makes it even more difficult to find someone that's qualified and fits that criteria. That's been a difficult task over the last several years. Not that this will ease that, but it would when you offer that and the amount of responsibility they have. So,
Okay.
unless you have
Thanks,
any more
Chief.
questions. Yes.
Thanks.
Do you have any more questions?
No, I think I'm good.
I'm good.
Thank you, Chief.
Just to address Robert's questions, his information there says 2.3 years to purge the amount that's sitting around right now if doing nothing else. So they'll keep them busy.
All right.
So, anybody,
I've been in the position where we've had a budget where we had a little bit more money and we went out and we hired somebody else. And then next year, or the year after, we had to let them go. And it's never a good thing. I can see where we can, the $50,000 for the evidence tech, I can see where we can find ways with that. But I would be in favor of going with the full-time evidence tech and leaving the rest of the budget the way it is.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
yeah?
Yeah.
Linda?
That's tough, because I want to fund both positions, but that's not feasible.
So, be 5 and a cent for that, Jim, let's move the evidence tech to full-time, okay?
That's what I hear.
Okay. So, thank you, staff, for all your hard work on that budget. I know it's the biggest concern of the year, and it is a tough job.
And we still want to help everyone else, and it's on the radar at
We'll get
least.
there, we'll get there. Next, let's discuss this BRE option. Haven't really had a chance to look over the contract. Mike, do you want to address it, or Dana, or who wants to be the spokesman for BRE today? And what's at hand is that your contract ends in December, right? Correct?
Yes.
And the other developer who could be working with or competing has asked for a year extension. So that kind of hamstrings you from booking the next year. That's my understanding, correct?
That is correct, and then it just kind of snowballs, because it's like, then if we're in this position next year, we're right back where we're at. It's like, if we don't know what he's doing or whatever,
Right.
come March of next year, we're trying to book 2022, and so I guess, with both proposals, I don't know if you guys have any questions, but as Jim explained to him, the first one is kind of a status quo, leaving things where they are, business as usual. I mean, in both contracts, we're going to have the 120-day notice. That scares us regardless, because, at any point, you guys can give us the 120-day notice and be done, and we get that. With the 6-year commitment that we're looking for, it saves you guys $50,000 right now, and the only thing that changes is, like Jim said, was the percentages that we give back. Right now on the legacy events, I don't know if you guys are aware, we give you 100% of all the legacy rent that comes in. And the only part that would change was, instead of 100%, we'd want to give you 20% and keep 80%. But we would take care of all of them. We'd take care of all the booking and everything on that. And that can be, on top of the $50,000 that we'd give back right now, that could be another $10,000, $20,000 on top of that. So that's a $60,000 to $70,000 a year for the first 3 years that we'd be looking at giving back to the city right now. And with, like I said, with the 6 years, that would be $50,000 back in your budget starting next year.
And the 2-year agreement that is being proposed reduces that from 100% today to 80%.
No, if we go for the 2 years, it would stay exactly as it is right now. We're giving you 100% of the legacy events, and we would keep 80% of all the other events that we put on. It, like I said, that in the 1 to 2 year agreement that we submitted doesn't change any of the percentages that we're paying right now. And then, like I said, the other half of the 6 year is after 3 years, we would drop another 25,000. So in year 4, 5, and 6, we have a potential of giving back almost $100,000 back to the city.
What does,
Now, Mike, the money we've gotten back the first 2 years, those are from the legacy events?
Yeah, well, they're for both.
For both?
For the
It's
legacies.
For and,
Yes.
and
Yep.
a percentage back?
Yep.
Okay.
Jim, what's our revenue annually for legacy event? Any idea?
So I figured, I went back and kind of looked at 19 after our meeting Monday, and was it Monday? Yeah. And so this year, like first quarter, we gave back like $11,000. If we changed to 20% across the board on everything, it would have been about $4,000 for the first 2 quarters and about $3,000 for the second quarter. And the second quarter would have been about $9,000, or it's going to be $9,000.
That's just legacy money?
That's all. No,
Okay, yeah, so
I don't-
what is just the legacy dollars?
without sitting down and calculating, because
Yeah, I'm not
so what it is, it's all civic music events, which is $13.90. They have 5 concerts or 6 concerts, 5 concerts at the auditorium this year.
It's $13.90 per concert?
Yep.
Okay.
The Weight Watchers, that one varies between $600 and $750 a month, depending on how many Wednesdays are in the month. The other big one is the craft show. This year was $3,000. You have all those, okay. The Marines don't pay anything for the ham and bean dinners, nor do the Legion groups. The Safe Trick or Treating doesn't pay anything. Snow Bowl, you guys already collect that money, but you guys also negotiate and take care of all that one, so I don't know what that money is.
2,500 last year? 4,000. It's supposed to be, if you did it by the contract, it's like 6,000 or 7,000. And the request, they're gonna have a request for 2,500, is what it was.
So, SEC graduation, I think, is about $1,500, and I'm guessing, because I don't have these in front of me, but that should be close. Stroke protection, $135. The school has some events in there, and that's, I think it's $500, and there's 2 to 3 a year, so about $1,500.
So, Jim, I'll get a question. So Crystal Ball, developer has a year to come up with a plan. Now, obviously, if they have a plan and we decided to go that way, they're not gonna implement right away. So we're talking a year or 2 before that would happen. So I'd be more inclined to lean to the 2-year. The couple of things is, one, you're gonna have to strike the language about the startup for 35,000 in both the proposals.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's already.
I
And
know.
that's already struck out.
I know, it's already struck, I'm just
It's
saying.
already struck out.
Yeah, so, but that, I would be more inclined to do that. The only other thing I would look at is an extension, 1-year extension. And then by then, we would know what the somewhere in the next 6, 8 months, we'd know what the developer is doing, and then extend to a 2 or 6 year.
And the reason we went with the 6-year was, I don't know if you guys know about the Iowa Visionary Grant, but at 2026, that runs
Right,
out.
that runs
And
out.
it really opens up the door for the city
To
to
do it.
really dig down on the auditorium and figure out what you want to do if you want
Right.
to keep, without having to pay back.
Because
any
we
of
wouldn't
that
have the
money.
penalty of paying back the money, right?
Well-
So I mean, that would be the one thing that I would almost, I see the wisdom of the 2-year, but, because I'm gonna be honest, you guys have done a great job. I'm gonna be a hard sell for this other developer to come in.
Sure.
I'm just gonna be. So I would be more inclined to do a 1-year extension as is, and then sometime next year, let's start negotiating on a 2 or 6 year.
Sure.
That way it doesn't lock us in for the 2 years at that deal, and it gives us some flexibility in case for some reason he comes in and it's great, and he's gonna work with you guys and everything else, and everything's Hosanna, you know? So that's the two things that I would.
Yeah, and that's originally what we asked for. We were just kind of asked also to kind of give you some options. So, you know, we're up for any of them. We just, this is kind of what we're thinking. Our big thing from day one is we want to give back to the city as much money as we can, and that's where
You're proving that.
the 6-year thing came in, so.
Yeah, I agree with John. You guys do a fantastic job. I really applaud everything that you do. And I know a lot of people are very passionate about that old Art Deco building. And I look at it and I say, it could be so much more. It could be so much more. So I really want to hear the other gentleman's proposal to see how we can, you know, really enhance and make that building so much more. Because I do envision that it's instead of a money pit, it'd actually be a big moneymaker for us. We just have to approach it and do it correctly.
And we've had several, I mean, we had a lady call us yesterday and, you know, was really concerned just by what was in the paper and everything about us losing our jobs down there with the new developer and stuff like that. So we told her, you know, it could go either way. I mean, they could keep us, they could not. So, you know.
Guys are
there's-
some of the best in the business.
Well-
They'd be fools not to keep you.
We appreciate that, and I think, you know, kind of like Venue Works, you know, it's about knowing our community. What is our community going to support? What are they going to come down and see? And that's like I said, when I've talked with Ryan and stuff, that was my big concern about bringing in some of these other big companies, is you're going to bring in somebody from LA that has no idea about Burlington and kind of what they want to hear, what they want to see, and what they're going to support. And it's like you start bringing in some of the stuff like what has been tried before, and we're going to be back in the same boat. And that concerns me with that. But so.
Yeah.
I just want to mention a couple things. So part of the reason we went for giving the option of the 6-year was because we did know that you had that 120 days out. As being a business person, I know that we always look at numbers. And we know that developers don't run in the timeline that everybody else thinks they should. So what the thought process is that, you know, right now this developer has already had his option for 6 months and has not really moved as much forward as all of us thought he was going to. So my concern is, and BRE's concern is so if we're left hanging for 2 or 3 years just trying to get an option that's out there. So that's why we gave the 6-year option, so that you guys could actually, the city could actually benefit of getting that only paying $200,000 instead of paying $250,000, because we know that 120 days is sitting out there against us.
Yeah, the one, and what she's referring to is letter I in the existing contract, and that would carry over.
That would carry over.
And we had originally put that in there. The biggest thing is if the council were to go to where you decided you couldn't afford this level of subsidy, you had the ability, you could kind of shutter it and go to more of a minimal usage.
Exactly.
And so you see the language in there that talks about if the council determines to fundamentally change the structure or use of any of the riverfront properties. Well, this other developer is that kind of
Is
term.
that
and
kind
it
of
fits
terminology.
within there.
Yeah.
That language is there whether you go 2 or 6.
Correct.
I don't see a reason why you don't look at doing a 6-year contract.
Well, I'm just punching the numbers on the 6-year right now. I mean, at the end of the day, even if we release the legacy dollars to BRE, we're still money ahead.
The city is.
Yeah, I mean, we're, in the first 3 years, we're 150K at, well, not entirely, I'm sorry.
Not entirely.
We're about $130,000 ahead. Now, all event revenue being equal. And we're about $190,000 ahead the next 4 years.
And what the
Or
event,
next 3 years, I'm
the
sorry.
advantages of letting those legacy events go is the fact that we have the negotiators that have the time to work with those events and help those event coordinators improve the money that's coming through on those events.
And that doesn't include staff time saved. The one
Correct.
question, I want to make sure I'm reading this right. So, so for legacy dollars, and I just did a rough guesstimate on the numbers you just gave me on the list. Unless there's something missing, we're about $11,000 of revenue annually for legacy events. Does that sound fairly accurate?
Probably
close.
Reasonable.
fairly close.
Little higher than that, but.
Rounded
Yeah.
around
Okay.
15,000.
But not substantially higher than that? Okay, all right. So if that's the case, and I'm reading this, we would still receive 20% of that number.
Yes.
And you guys would then take 80% of that number. But in the first year, we're reducing our subsidy to you by 50,000.
Correct.
The remaining events, we would still essentially receive the same portion that we receive today.
20%, yeah.
The 20%.
So if you guys have a
20%
wedding, that's not part of this legacy event, so we're writing you a check for $50,000 less, but you're keeping essentially $10,000 more of legacy dollars.
Correct.
So we're still $40,000 ahead at that point.
Yes.
And there's nothing else that I can see that changes, except you guys are more comfortable with the fact that you have a 6-year agreement,
Correct.
and the 6-month language is still in the contract.
Yes.
Plus, we're reducing
120
staff
days.
time.
120 days.
I'm sorry, 120 days, 4 months.
Yeah.
This is still in the contract.
I think if we gave you 6 years, you could really blow it out of the water with some events, and you could plan it a little better, and maybe get something big down there that would just rock everybody.
It starts bringing the money in, and also the repetition of our coordinators and our executive directors to be able to go ahead and get this done. You know, right now, we've been kind of tiptoeing around because we knew it was just 2 years, 3 years, and then it's like all of a sudden a developer's coming in. So
Yeah.
that, you know, we can actually go and move forward. And we understand that we still might have that developer action that might happen, but at least this gives us a chance to move forward.
Other than building a hotel, do you think you guys could do the same thing that they're wanting to do?
So, so we looked at our numbers. So on his slide sheet that he gave the other day, if we stick with that $103 per person per event, so our first year in the building, we had about 36,000 people through the auditorium. If you look at that number, and that number was real, it would have been $5 million or so towards downtown. Our second year, we had 50,000 people through. So if you look at our numbers compared to what he's projecting for the next 4 years, our numbers are right in line with what he's projecting. Now, this year, we kind of, if we wouldn't have had the flood, that number could have been 75 or 100,000 people through the building without having to cancel the events that we had to. So I think we're right in line with what he's projecting other people would come in and do without having to, like I said. So he told me the number that he was looking at for Dubuque is $900,000 that they get in a subsidy up there. So I don't know what number he's going to come to the city and ask for. So that, like I said, that's what scares me. But like I said, I think we're right in line with what he's already saying that they're going to do. This year was just kind of a tough year.
I think the only thing that we just as a council need to do is decide whether or not we feel like years 4 through 6, we could save more than $75,000.
And that could
In
come up
subsidy.
for discussion again. I mean, because you have that 120 days, that could
Right.
come up for discussion in that end of that third year.
Yeah.
You know, we left that there for that sheer reason, because life changes, our city changes, and we've
Yep.
got to move that on.
We also don't want to hamstring ourselves and say, hey, we're going to give you back another $50,000 and, maybe
Can't
it's
tell the
just,
future.
we're just not there. But, come that fourth year, if we're at that place that we can afford to do it and we're sustaining what we're doing, I think that is an option to change at that point. It's just something
okay
we had to
with
put
the 6 year.
something
I'm
down.
okay with the 6-year, to be honest with you, because it does have the opt-out clause. So mucho respect to BRE and your organization, the board and staff, for what you've done so far. And I'm more than comfortable continuing through our operate if we do not do anything with this developer, because I think we'll continue to see benefits. The one thing I would tell you is I'd love to see you get Oktoberfest back downtown. I'm tired of freezing
And
my
we're
rear
working
end
on
off.
that
There's
one.
been talks
Out there.
about that.
Jim, is there anything in the contract that
The
I'm
depot
missing?
would be a great place.
What's that?
Is there anything in that contract that I'm missing from a number standpoint that I didn't mention? Sound about right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, so let's go down the line. Where's anybody at? Any questions for anybody?
No. I mean, I'm all for BRE. I said that before. so
1, 2, 6,
6.
6. Linda?
I'm more comfortable with the 2.
Okay. Matt?
I think I'm okay with the 6. I mean,
Okay.
120 to opt out. If you don't
You're
like it
you're
at
still
the end of
covered.
the day, then you can stick it out.
I'd like to give you more time to plan, so I'm good with the 6.
So I'm with the 6. So that's what I would say. That will have to go on the city council meeting, right, Jim?
That would go through the next work session.
Next work
We need to
session,
have
we'll
an
go from
actual
there.
contract drawn up.
Okay.
but-
All right. Okay, is there anything else? Am I missing anything?
No, if you're satisfied, we'll make the adjustments with the budget. And Stephanie will need to be, do we have a set date for public hearing next week? And it's based off of carrying forward our existing tax levy. This will work within, what you're talking about all works within that, and we're in good spot.
All right.
Jim, those funds that aren't used, that, the savings from the insurance stop revenues, the funds that aren't used, what do we do with those? They go in the general fund and they become kind of
They're
a
in the
buffer?
they're in the general fund, and they'll come up with a couple of things that will, I mean, this year, we're looking at having a little bit of cost savings. We've had positions that have been open. So we'll have potential, we are already committed with some parking lots. We need to make sure that we know that we can adequately cover it. I think that we're okay with the funds that are identified, but we may be a
Okay.
little short, so we need to know that we can backstop that. We have a couple of different pieces of property that we're gonna bring forward for some discussion on. We're setting us, and they're not huge dollar amounts, but they are some dollar amounts for purchase just that are in locations that make sense to get if we can.
Okay.
We have 20,000 that you committed to the housing, the match for the housing. That was not budgeted anywhere. We'll need to do a transfer for that. The airport came in with a $55,000 request that wasn't budgeted. We need to make sure that we cover that. Eric is looking to do a more expensive tennis court than what was originally budgeted.
Okay.
So we need an extra 80, 100,000 for that. But, so, those
Are all
are all
three of
things
those-
that we're looking at for this year, but that's the kind of thing that we will have the potential to make sure that we have some what-ifs.
Are those three things that you just mentioned, they'll be put into the budget before it's processed, or will they come
They're
before
coming
us
out of this
for
year,
pass?
and you'll have
Okay.
you'll have, those are all
Resolutions
things
to
that.
make that happen?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, we'll set them aside by resolution. You've already committed to a lot of them, but
I'm just thinking like the tennis courts and.
the tennis court, you'll
Yep.
have to do a resolution for the transfer.
If I can add, all the department managers and Jim, I think you guys did such a wonderful job explaining this to us and running us through the numbers, and I don't know if we appreciate you enough, but just wanted to put that out there. I don't know what we'd do without you. All of you guys, thank you.
I did like the midterm exam too.
Did you?
Yes, I did, because, for us, there's three of us that have been, this is our third time, and then two new ones, and I would suggest that we continue that, kind of a midterm prep.
Summary where.
Yeah, summary,
where-
here's what you've heard
That was
so
where I
far.
actually got caught up to where I had time to put anything into it, so.
Well, that was a good thing.
Unfortunately.
So we're all in agreement on what we have, right? So I think we're pretty much done here. Now, the Councilman Moppin brought some sandwiches, if you could help him out, eat some of that so he doesn't have to drag it home.
They're really
Feel free,
good.
feel free.
He grew the beef.
And
family
that's,
Raise the beef.
He grew it.
that's in, right?